Hey everybody, and welcome to this second podcast for the school year. This time I want to talk with you about the other foundation of biology. We talked about one foundation of biology, which is the primary one, evolution by natural selection, which allows everything in biology to be connected and to make sense as a whole. This other foundation is simply a thread that is going to run through everything we talk about living things. It's something all living things have to do. What is this other foundation? It is the idea that organisms, all living things, must maintain homeostasis. Now, I hope this is not a new word for you. I hope that you remember this from your first year of biology, but if you don't, let's real quickly talk about what exactly homeostasis is. Homeostasis is the idea that all living things have to keep their internal conditions constant. They have to keep them essentially the same. They can't let different parameters, for example, body temperature, get in one extreme or the other. They've got to keep things along some middle ground, if you will, or along an appropriate line. Now, why is that? The reason for that is because as all matter is made of molecules. All living things are made of molecules, and the molecules that make up your body or the body of any other living thing, even if it's unicellular, the molecules only work properly when they are in very particular conditions. If you alter those conditions, then the molecules begin behaving differently. They engage in different relationships with other molecules, and the next thing you know, the molecule you started with isn't there anymore, or it's altered its shape, or something like that. So the ability of a living thing to actually continue living is completely dependent on its ability to keep the conditions within its body constant, so that this very narrow parameter of hospitable conditions for these molecules to exist is maintained. When an organism's body can no longer do this, then things start to fall apart. Okay? So our ability to live is contingent on our body's ability to maintain a really tight control over the kind of conditions that exist within it. Okay? Now, there's lots of examples. Let's look at this example of how, and remember, there's lots of ways your body is fighting to maintain homeostasis. There's so much variability outside your body, yet your body is trying to maintain a really tight parameter of conditions. So we're going to look at just one. Let's talk about these two animals that I've put up on the screen here. What do these two animals have in common? We have a lizard on the left, polar bears on the right. Really cute picture. Well, they have lots and lots and lots of things in common, but dealing with our little discussion of homeostasis, I would like to focus on just one of those things. Okay? And that is that they both have to maintain homeostasis with regard to body temperature. Okay? Why do they have to maintain homeostasis with regard to body temperature? And I touched on it earlier, but let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. It is all about the molecules, okay? All about the molecules. Now, as I already said, like all matter, living things are made of molecules. What are molecules? I'm really hoping that you have not completely forgotten your intro chemistry kinds of things, but Atoms that are linked together by chemical bonds are molecules. That's a water molecule there in front of you, and there are chemical bonds that are holding the hydrogens to that oxygen together, and they do not come apart easily. And if they do come apart, you don't have water anymore. You've got hydrogen and oxygen, which have completely different properties from the molecular water that we know. So a key point about the molecules of living things is that shape matters for our molecules that make up our bodies. Hemoglobin is an example. There are thousands and thousands of different types of molecules that make up your body. Hemoglobin is just one, but it's a good example to use. This is showing you a diagram of a hemoglobin molecule. This is on the left, and the different colors is a complete hemoglobin molecule. On the right is showing you one of the 4 units. If you see on the left, there are 4 distinct units that make up an entire molecule of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin, if you'll recall, is the molecule that carries carries oxygen within your blood cells. Now, on the right, you're seeing just one of those 4 units and the molecular structure of them. These are the atoms put together that make up one part of that hemoglobin. If you alter any of these atoms and how they're bound, you risk altering the shape of this molecule, and that may alter its ability to carry oxygen. So you alter any one of those little chemical bonds, any one of those atoms, pull it out, knock it out of place, and this thing potentially cannot work anymore to carry oxygen. If you can't carry oxygen in your blood, you've got serious problems. So shape matters, okay? So let's go back to talking about temperature and how it affects molecules, keeping in mind that shape matters. What do atoms and molecules do as they get warmer? I hope you remember that they tend to move. Their random molecular motion speeds up, and their movements get more and more wild and frantic. So, being as that is true, what effects would that have on the molecules if you begin heating up molecules in a living thing? For example, that hemoglobin, what's going to happen to that molecular structure? Well, if the atoms are beginning to move more wildly, then that hemoglobin is probably not going to be able to hold its shape, and it may even bust apart depending on how much heat is applied. So that's why we can't let temperature get too high within a living thing. We risk starting to disrupt the molecular bonds because we're increasing molecular movement, the kinetic energy of the molecules. What do atoms and molecules do as they get colder? Again, they slow down their movement and indeed move less and less. Now, what effects would that have on molecules that make up living things? Well, generally it's if you have molecules that are supposed to be interacting with other molecules, they bump into each other less because they're not moving as fast, and so usually chemical reaction rates slow down. Of these two conditions, heating molecules usually is more devastating, and permanently so, than cooling them is. But nonetheless, if you do not keep temperatures within this narrow parameter where they're at their best for the molecular behavior, you start to disrupt either the shape of the molecules themselves or the level of activity the molecules can engage in. So the bottom line here, not to overwhelm you with talking, but is that if you alter the temperature, allow it to vary a lot in your body, then the molecules are not going to behave properly. Okay? So we know what these two critters have in common, lots of things, but they have to maintain homeostasis with regard to body temperature is one of these things. Okay? So what then is different about them? Also, lots of things, but with regard to how they maintain homeostasis with body temperature, it is in fact how they manage to maintain this level of constancy with regard to temperature in their bodies. How do they manage their homeostatic temperature, thermal control? How do they do it? That's what's different. They both have to do it, but how do they do it? Okay? This lizard is a cold-blooded animal. Now, what does that mean? The better term, and you should know this term, is that they are ectothermic. What does this mean? It means that their body, they have no control of their internal body temperature, meaning their body temperature will be whatever the environmental temperature is that they are in. So if it is 65 degrees outside, that's their body temperature. If it's 95 degrees and they're there, then it's 95 degree body temperature. They are cold-blooded. The vast majority of life on Earth works this way. Not just this lizard, not just frogs and other invertebrates, but insects and just worms. Everything except for very few organisms on Earth are ectothermic. Okay. Now, how do then, if we already said they have to maintain homeostasis, how do ectotherms, who are at the mercy of their environment, maintain homeostasis? They do so by modifying their behavior. Simply this: if they are cold, they get themselves in a place where they will be warmer, and so they bask out in the sun. Or if they are too hot, perhaps they get in the water and they bathe, or perhaps they go into the shade and get in a cooler environmental temperature. Perhaps they burrow, they get into a hole in the ground, and that maintains their body temperature at a very constant rate. Now, warm-blooded animals, what is that properly called? That's called being endothermic. This polar bear and its little baby are endotherms, and that simply means that unlike ectotherms, their body temperature is constant regardless of the environmental temperature. If I walked outside today and it was 40 degrees, my body temperature is going to be 98.6. because that's what my body temperature always is unless I'm ill. Okay? Now, there are limits to that. If you take me to the Arctic Circle and drop me out there with no resources, eventually my body temperature is not going to be able to be maintained. But in normal conditions, you know, the fluctuations we normally deal with, your body temperature is going to be very, very, very constant, regardless of the outside fluctuations. Now, how do endotherms achieve that? Well, they achieve that by the chemical reactions that are occurring in their own bodies that are creating heat and energy, and they use that energy to do things that keep their body warm. For example, this is going to introduce you to another important idea, and that is the use of feedback loops. These are used a lot to control homeostasis in many different ways, and not just with body temperature in the body. If conditions get too extreme in one direction, there is some way the body can recognize that and bring things back down. And if it goes too far back down, the body can recognize it and bring it up. That's a negative feedback loop, okay, where it's like, oh, too far, bring it back down, oh, too far, bring it back up, negative feedback. If things go wrong, we correct it. Okay? So let's talk about body temperature. If your body temperature, which is supposed to be 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius, gets too high, you're outside, you're getting overheated. Okay? There is a part of your brain called the hypothalamus. Okay, it's right near the base of the brain, and there are cells in your hypothalamus that act as a thermostat. They recognize temperature and will send nerve signals to your body and cause your skin to sweat. This causes evaporative cooling and will hopefully bring your temperature down. But also, these same nerve signals will send messages to your blood vessels in your skin to begin to dilate or widen a bit, which sends more blood flow to the surface of your skin. Why would we want to do that if you are feeling hot? Because hopefully we are going to release some of the heat from the core of your body, where all your important organs are, and release it to the environment at the surface of your skin. So we'll bring your temperature down by sweating and by dilating the surface of the blood cells. Now, suppose you've done that very effectively. In fact, you're doing it so effectively that now your body temperature is decreasing, and maybe your hypothalamus says, oh, that's a little too far. What are we going to do? Hypothalamus recognizes that as well and sends nerve signals to do something a little different. In this case, causing you to shiver, those involuntary muscle contractions, and those muscle contractions generate heat. All of that activity in the muscles and the friction and so on generates heat. And other nerve signals will constrict those surface blood vessels back down, so we're shutting off blood flow, at least somewhat, to the skin and retaining the blood to keep our heat in near our core organs, which is where that heat is really needed. And if we do that really well, perhaps too well, perhaps we go up, our body temperature goes too high, and then the feedback loop begins all over again. So this requires a significant amount of energy from the organisms doing it. Okay, this is a pretty energy intensive process as opposed to just lying still on a rock. Okay, and doing nothing else. So let me remind you very quickly about the lens through which we said we were going to view all characteristics of organisms, and that was the lens of natural selection and evolution. Why does natural selection favor organisms that can maintain homeostasis? Well, because of the nature of molecules. Molecules work very particularly according to whatever conditions they are in. And so those organisms that can maintain the conditions needed for these molecules to work correctly succeed and reproduce. Now, looking at our ectotherms and our endotherms, does one of those methods have adaptive value over the other? It's really important that you think about how are we actually determining adaptive value. Ectotherms are really, really successful. There are more ectotherms on this planet by far than endotherms. Okay? Mammals and birds are our only endotherms. All insects, which is the largest animal group, everything except birds and mammals that is alive is an ectotherm. So is ectothermy successful? Oh yes, very, very successful. Now, however, we are endotherms. Can a crocodile live in the tundra? Probably not, because it would never get warm enough for an extended enough period of time for that animal to be able to do its life processes. It would have to be in a state of hibernation, burrowed somewhere in order to stay alive, and it probably couldn't do it. So in terms of being successful in allowing organisms to increase their range, in terms of being successful in being able to be active at all seasons, all times of day, night, whatever, then in those kinds of terms, endothermy has certain definite advantages. However, there is a price to pay for those advantages. Endotherms have to consume a lot. I have, Myrtle, the snake that's across the hall from our classroom. I have to feed Myrtle maybe once every couple of weeks, one mouse. If I fed you one mouse every couple of weeks, you'd get pretty hostile because you'd be starving to death. Ectothermy has far fewer energy demands than endothermy does. Endothermy is extraordinarily energy demanding. So if you're going to be an endotherm, you get to increase your level of activity, but there's a price to be paid for that. If you're an ectotherm, you don't have to eat very much, but there's a price to be paid for that. So in evolutionary change and adaptations, there's always a yin and a yang, and you need to keep that in mind. There's no perfect solution. All there are solutions. Okay. Endothermy clearly has allowed for an increase in the complexity of behavior, but it's also very demanding. These organisms have to be searching for food all the time. So that's part of what has led to this increase in complexity of behavior, this need to find food to fuel this endothermic lifestyle. So, enough about that. Okay, there's another example of homeostasis that I'll give you, but I'll do it in a separate section of this so that I can go ahead and not make this one too long. So part 2 coming up. Thanks a lot. Take care.